Welcome to the Midnight Audiobook Club, your cozy late-night sanctuary for the world's greatest literature. Before we dive into tonight's extraordinary tale, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and click the notification bell. Your support helps us keep the night alive with stories, and you won't miss any of our upcoming midnight journeys. Tonight, we're going to meet William Shakespeare. You may already know his name. He wrote sweeping tragedies about princes and kings, and dazzling comedies full of mistaken identities and midsummer magic. But tonight's story is neither of those things exactly. It's something gentler. Something written, most scholars believe, near the very end of his life, when he was tired and ready to go home. Shakespeare wrote the Tempest around 1611, when he was about 47 years old. He had spent more than 20 years in London, writing nearly 40 plays, filling theatres, making audiences laugh and weep and gasp, night after night, year after year. And then, it seems, he simply got tired. Tired in the good way, the way you feel after a long, full day, when you've done everything you set out to do, and you're ready, at last, to put your feet up. So he wrote one more play, a quieter one. A play about a magician, an old man named Prospero, who has spent years on a lonely island, using magical powers to control everything and everyone around him. And in the final scene, this powerful magician does something very brave. He gives it all up. He breaks his staff. He drowns his book of spells, and he simply stops. Many people who study Shakespeare believe that Prospero, in that final moment, is Shakespeare himself. That the old magician laying down his magic is really the old playwright laying down his pen, saying goodbye to the theatre. Going home, at last, to his family in a quiet town called Stratford, far from the bright lights and noise of London. We can't know for certain if that's true. Shakespeare never tells us directly. But there's a particular tenderness to the ending of this story that feels, somehow, like a person who has decided it's time to rest, and that, more than any sword fight or any crown, is what tonight's story is really about. Not just magic and shipwrecks and young love, though we'll have all of those too, but about the moment when someone very powerful decides that the most powerful thing they can do is let go. So here is what happens. 12 years ago, a duke named Prospero was betrayed by his own brother and cast out to sea with his little daughter, Miranda. They found themselves alone, finally, on a small island, just the two of them, and a strange enchanted creature named Caliban, and an airy, mischievous spirit named Ariel, who Prospero rescued and who now serves him. For 12 years, that's been their whole world, just an island. Just the two of them, just magic and books, and the wind and the sea. And then, one day, fate sends a ship sailing close to their island, a ship carrying the very people who wronged Prospero all those years ago, and Prospero must decide what to do with the storm in his hands. The sea is wide and dark tonight. Somewhere out there, a ship is sailing toward an island it doesn't know exists. And on that island, an old man with a staff in his hand is about to raise a storm. Here is William Shakespeare's The Tempest. Act 1, Scene 1, A storm at sea. Picture a ship, far out at sea, in the middle of the worst storm any of the sailors on board have ever seen. Thunder rolled, lightning cracked the sky in two, waves climbed higher than the masts, and the wind screamed through the ropes like something alive and furious. On deck, the ship's master shouted for his boatswain, the officer in charge of the crew, to do something, anything to keep them from running aground. "Boatswain, here, master. What cheer? Good, speak to the sailors. Fall to it quickly, or we'll wreck on the rocks." Below deck, frightened and important passengers kept getting in the way. There was Alonso, the King of Naples, his brother Sebastian, a duke named Antonio, and an old, kind counselor named Gonzalo, who tried, gently, to remind the boatswain that some very important people were aboard. The boatswain was not impressed. "I'm sorry, but I care for no one more than myself." "You're a counselor. If you can command these waves to be silent, do it. If you can't, then thank your life so far and get below." The sea did not care who was a king and who was a sailor. The storm threw the ship side to side, and the cry went up that they were sinking, that all hands were lost. And then, just as the ship seemed doomed, the scene shifted, because the storm, it turns out, was not entirely the sea's idea. Act 1, Scene 2, Prospero's story. On a nearby island, a young woman named Miranda stood on the shore, watching the distant ship toss in the waves, her hands pressed to her chest in distress. "If by your art, my dearest father, you have put the wild waters in this roar, calm them," she begged. "Oh, I have suffered with those that I saw suffer. A brave ship, surely full of noble creatures, dashed all to pieces." Her father, Prospero, stood beside her, a long cloak around his shoulders, holding his magic staff. "Be collected," he told her gently. "No more amazement. Tell your piteous heart there's no harm done. No harm, no harm. I have done nothing but in care of you, my dear one, my daughter. I have used my magic to make sure that not a single soul on that ship will come to any harm. Every one of them is safe." And then, sitting down together on the sand, Prospero finally told Miranda the story he had never told her before, the story of who they really were and how they came to be on this lonely island. 12 years ago, Prospero began, "I was not just your father. I was the Duke of Milan, a powerful man in a powerful city." Miranda listened, wide-eyed. She had never known any of this. "I loved my books more than I loved ruling," Prospero continued. "I gave the day-to-day business of governing to my own brother, Antonio, while I shut myself away with my studies. I trusted him completely." "And he betrayed you," Miranda said quietly, understanding already. "He did. Slowly, while I wasn't watching, my brother turned my own officials against me. He made a secret deal with Alonso, the King of Naples, and together, in the dead of night, they had us seized." Prospero's voice grew quiet, remembering. "They didn't dare kill us outright. The people loved me too much for that. So instead, they put us on a rotting little boat with no sail no rigging, nothing, and pushed us out to sea, to die quietly where no one would ever know. Miranda reached for her father's hand. "How did we survive, Gonzalo?" said Prospero, and his voice softened with gratitude, the same kind old counselor who tried to calm the boatswain just now aboard that ship. "He was ordered to abandon us, but out of love, he secretly gave us food, fresh water, and the most precious thing of all, my books of magic." And so, drifting on the sea, a deposed duke and his small daughter had washed ashore on this very island, and here they had lived for 12 long years, while Prospero studied his books and grew into a powerful magician. "And now," Prospero said, standing and brushing the sand from his cloak, "Fortune has finally smiled on me. The very people who wronged us are aboard that ship out there, right now, sailing close to our island." He raised his staff toward the sea. "My dear Miranda, it's time for you to rest a while," and, with a gentle wave of his hand, he charmed her into a deep, peaceful sleep. Then, alone, Prospero called out for his helper. "Come away, Ariel, come." And in a shimmer of light, Ariel appeared, a spirit of air, quick and bright and full of mischief, bowing low. "All hail, great master. I come to answer your best pleasure, be it to fly, to swim, to dive into the fire, to ride on the curled clouds. To your strong bidding, task Ariel and all his quality." Prospero smiled. "Did you perform the storm exactly as I instructed?" "Every inch," said Ariel proudly. "I boarded the king's ship. Now in the waist, the deck, in every cabin, I flamed amazement. The sailors all leapt into the sea, thinking the ship would burn. And the king's own son, Ferdinand, was the very first to jump, crying, 'Hell is empty, and all the devils are here. But they are safe?' Prospero asked. 'Not a hair on their heads harmed, not a hair perished,' Ariel confirmed. 'On their sustaining garments not a blemish, but fresher than before. And just as you commanded, I've scattered them into little groups all over the island. Ferdinand I've landed all alone, in a quiet corner, sitting with his arms folded sighing.' Prospero nodded, well pleased. 'You have done well, my Ariel. There's more work yet today. Be invisible to every eye but mine.' And then, before Ariel flew off to his next task, Prospero went to wake his other servant, a rougher, earthier creature than airy Ariel. 'Caliban,' he called. 'You earth, you, speak.' And out from a cave came Caliban, grumbling, the native creature of the island, who Prospero had found here years ago and put to work. 'This island is mine, by my mother Sycorax,' Caliban muttered bitterly, 'which thou taxed from me. You taught me language, and my profit on it is, I know how to curse.' Prospero, unmoved, reminded him sharply of his duties and sent him off to fetch firewood, threatening him with cramps if he refused. Grumbling, Caliban obeyed. And then, drawn by music that only he could hear, music that invisible Ariel was playing just for him, a young man came walking along the shore. This was Ferdinand, son of the King of Naples, who believed his father had drowned in the wreck, and who followed the strange, beautiful melody the way a person follows a feeling they can't quite explain. Prospero gently woke Miranda. "The fringed curtains of thine eye advance," he said softly, "and say what thou seest yond." Miranda opened her eyes and saw, for the very first time in her entire life, a young man who was not her father. "What is't?" "A spirit," she whispered, astonished. "Lord, how it looks about! Believe me, sir, it carries a brave form, but 'tis a spirit." "No, wench," Prospero told her, smiling to himself. "It eats and sleeps, and hath such senses as we have. This gallant whom thou seest was in the wreck. Ferdinand, just as struck, had seen her too." "Most sure, the goddess on whom these airs attend," Ferdinand said, dropping to one knee. "Vouchsafe my prayer may know if you remain upon this island, and that you will some good instruction give how I may bear me here. My prime request. Oh, you wonder if you be maid or no?" "No wonder, sir," Miranda answered shyly, "but certainly a maid." And just like that, within minutes of meeting, both of them had fallen completely, helplessly in love. Watching this unfold exactly as he had planned it, Prospero felt a quiet, private satisfaction, but he did not let it show. Because Prospero understood something about love that he wanted these two young people to understand as well, that anything won too easily is rarely treasured the way it deserves to be. And so, though his heart was glad, his face turned suddenly stern. "Soft, sir," Prospero said sharply, stepping forward. "One word more. They are both in either's powers, but this swift business I must uneasy make, lest too light winning make the prize light." He turned to Ferdinand with cold suspicion. "I charge thee that thou attend me. You come here as a spy, to win this island from me, the lord on it." "No, as I am a man," Ferdinand protested, startled. Miranda, horrified at her father's sudden harshness towards someone she had only just met but already cared for deeply, rushed to defend him. "There's nothing ill can dwell in such a temple," she pleaded. "If the ill spirit have so fair a house, good things will strive to dwell with it. Follow me," Prospero said firmly, ignoring her, drawing his sword to make sure Ferdinand could not resist. "Speak not for him." With a wave of his hand, Prospero froze Ferdinand in place with magic, the young man's sword arm suddenly useless, his strength gone. "My spirits, as in a dream, are all bound up," Ferdinand said, bewildered, unable to move. And so Prospero led the charmed, helpless young prince away, not to harm him, though Ferdinand didn't know that yet, but to set him to hard labor, carrying heavy logs as a test. A test of whether love, when it costs something real, is still worth choosing. Miranda watched them go, distressed and confused by her father's sudden cruelty to a man who had done nothing wrong. She didn't yet understand what we, listening tonight, already suspect. That sometimes the people who love us most are willing to look unkind for just a little while, if it means making sure that what's coming next will last. Act 2, Scene 1. The Castaways and a Dangerous Plan. Elsewhere on the island, the king's men had gathered together on a different shore, wet, exhausted, but very much alive even though none of them yet knew it. Old Gonzalo, ever cheerful, tried to comfort the grieving King Alonso, who believed his son Ferdinand had drowned. "Beseech you, sir, be merry," Gonzalo said. "You have cause, so have we all, of joy, for our escape is much beyond our loss." But two other men in the group, Antonio, Prospero's treacherous brother, and Sebastian, the king's own brother, were not interested in being cheerful. While everyone else fell into an unnaturally deep sleep, Ariel's magic again at work, these two stayed awake and began to whisper. "What if," Antonio said quietly, watching the sleeping king, "Ferdinand is truly drowned, and Claribel, the king's daughter, is far away in Tunis, too far to ever inherit the throne in time? Who, then, comes next?" Sebastian understood at once. "I do," he said slowly. "Exactly," said Antonio. "And I once stood exactly where you now stand, and I solved my problem the way I'm about to suggest you solve yours." Antonio, after all, had taken his own brother's title once already. He saw no reason Sebastian shouldn't do the same. They drew their swords, creeping toward the sleeping king. And at that exact moment, Ariel, invisible, watching everything, sang softly into Gonzalo's sleeping ear, waking him just in time. "Now, good angels, preserve the king," Gonzalo cried, startling awake and rousing the others. Antonio and Sebastian quickly lowered their swords, claiming they'd only woken to strange noises. Perhaps lions, they said, nothing more. No one quite believed them, but no one could prove otherwise either. And so the danger passed, for now, though it would not be the last time those two men thought about crowns that weren't theirs. Act 2, Scene 2. A monster, a jester, and a bottle. Now, in an entirely different and much sillier corner of the island, Caliban was grumbling through the woods, cursing Prospero under his breath, when he heard thunder rolling in. Frightened, he threw his cloak over himself and lay flat on the ground, hoping to hide. And that's exactly when Trinculo, the king's jester, soaked through and shivering from the shipwreck, stumbled upon him. "What have we here? A man or a fish?" Trinculo wondered, poking at the strange lump under the cloak. "Dead or alive? A fish. He smells like a fish." A very ancient and fish-like smell. Hearing more thunder and seeing no other shelter, Trinculo decided the safest thing to do was simply crawl underneath the same cloak. And so there they were, two strangers, one monster and one jester, huddled together under a single cloak, when Stefano, the king's drunken butler, came wandering by, singing loudly to himself and swigging from a bottle he'd rescued from the wreck. He spotted the four-legged, two-headed lump on the ground and, quite drunk, became immediately convinced he'd discovered some sort of island monster. 4 legs and 2 voices, a most delicate monster, Stefano declared. "Open your mouth. Here is that which will give language to you. Open your mouth." He poured wine into Caliban's mouth, who, having never tasted such a thing, was instantly, thoroughly delighted. "That's a brave god," Caliban said, gazing at Stefano with sudden, wine-soaked devotion, "and bears celestial liquor. I will kneel to him." And just like that, poor confused Caliban switched his loyalty entirely, abandoning Prospero, his old master, in favor of this strange drunken stranger he'd decided must be some kind of god, simply because of what was in his bottle. "I'll show thee every fertile inch of the island," Caliban promised eagerly, "and I will kiss thy foot. I pray thee, be my god." It would have been funny if it weren't also the beginning of something rather dangerous, because Caliban, freed from one master, was already imagining freedom from every master, and freedom, to an angry heart, can sometimes look a lot like revenge. Act 3, Scene 1. A promise between two who already love. Days had passed since Ferdinand was led away under Prospero's spell. True to his word, Prospero had set him to hard, humbling labor, carrying heavy logs, stacking them, piling them again, a test the young prince hadn't asked for and didn't fully understand. It was hard work for a man raised in palaces, but Ferdinand didn't mind it nearly as much as he should have. Because the moment he had seen Miranda on the shore, something in him had settled, even chained to logs, even far from home, even believing his father drowned. He carried the wood and thought only of her face, and he didn't have to wait long to see it again. "Alas, now, pray you work not so hard," Miranda said, coming closer despite her father's strict orders to stay away. "I would the lightning had burnt up those logs that you are enjoined to pile." Ferdinand set down his burden and smiled, the smile of someone who has been thinking about a person all day and suddenly finds them standing right in front of him. "O most dear mistress," he said, "the sun will set before I shall discharge what's in my heart. I had rather crack my sinews, break my back, than you should such dishonor undergo while I sit lazy by." Miranda sat down on a nearby rock, watching him work, unable to look away. "If you'll sit down, I'll bear your logs the while," she offered. "Pray, give me that. I'll carry it to the pile." "No, precious creature," Ferdinand said firmly. "I had rather crack my sinews than you should do this dishonor." Watching invisibly nearby, Prospero allowed himself a small, secret smile. Exactly this tenderness, this willingness to suffer rather than let her suffer, was what he had hoped to see. Miranda, who in her whole life had never seen any man besides her own father, until that one extraordinary afternoon on the shore, looked at Ferdinand now with something steadier than wonder, something that had had a few days to grow. "I have never known another woman," she said softly, "nor have I seen more that I may call men than you, good friend, and my dear father. I would not wish any companion in the world but you." Ferdinand knelt before her, log forgotten, on the ground beside him. "I am, in my condition, a prince, Miranda, I do think a king. But oh, how I would not endure this wooden slavery if there weren't something so precious in it." "Do you love me?" Miranda asked simply. "I beyond all limit of what else in the world do love, prize, honor you," Ferdinand answered. And there, among the logs and the labor that suddenly didn't matter at all anymore, they did what they had both been certain of since the very first moment they laid eyes on each other. They promised themselves to one another, properly, completely. "My husband, then?" Miranda asked. "Aye, with a heart as willing as bondage, air of freedom, said Ferdinand. Here's my hand. And mine, with my heart in it, said Miranda. Behind a nearby tree, Prospero watched the whole thing with quiet, overflowing joy, though he kept his happiness carefully hidden, for there was still more testing he intended to do, and more of his plan yet to unfold. But for now, on this small patch of island, the love that had begun in a single startled glance had grown, in just a few days, into something neither of them intended to ever let go of. Sometimes love starts with lightning, and sometimes the lightning is only the beginning, and the real promise comes a little while after, once you've had time to be sure. Act 3, Scene 2. A plot goes wrong. Back among the drunken trio, things had taken a sharper turn. Caliban, increasingly bold under Stefano's protection, had begun to talk about something darker than friendship. As I told thee before, I am subject to a tyrant, Caliban said, meaning Prospero. A sorcerer, that by his cunning hath cheated me of the island. That's most certain, Stefano agreed, quite drunk and quite easily persuaded. Thou mayst brain him, Caliban suggested, having first seized his books, for without them he's but a sot, as I am, and has not one spirit to command. It was a startling thing to hear, this strange, half-wild creature, calmly suggesting murder. And worse, Caliban had a further incentive to offer. And that most deeply to consider is the beauty of his daughter. Caliban continued. He himself calls her a nonpareil. Bring thy good axe. Batter his skull, or paunch him with a stake, and then, Stefano, thou shalt be lord of it, and I'll serve thee. Stefano, delighted at the idea of becoming lord of the island, and of marrying Miranda, having scarcely ever seen her, agreed eagerly to the plan. But invisible, unseen by any of them, Ariel had been listening the entire time, and Ariel had absolutely no intention of letting this plot succeed. So, very quietly, very mischievously, Ariel began playing strange, enchanted music. Music that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. What is this same music? Trinculo asked, frightened. Be not afeard, Caliban told them, for he, at least, was used to the island's magic. The isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. And entranced by the music, the three of them stumbled off into the woods to follow it, led by Ariel, deeper and deeper, far away from where any real harm could be done. Some plots, it turns out, simply get lost on the way to becoming real. Act 3, Scene 3, The Banquet and the Storm of Guilt. Meanwhile, the king and his weary party, Antonio and Sebastian among them, had been wandering the island for hours, exhausted, hungry, and increasingly hopeless about ever finding Ferdinand alive. Suddenly, strange and beautiful shapes appeared before them, spirits conjured by Prospero, carrying in a magnificent banquet and inviting the starving travelers to eat. The weary men could hardly believe their eyes. Just as they reached for the food, thunder crashed. And Ariel appeared, transformed into the terrifying shape of a great harpy, wings spread wide, and the banquet vanished as quickly as it had come. You are three men of sin, Ariel's voice boomed, whom destiny hath cast upon this shore, because you are men of sin. Alonso Antonio and Sebastian froze, swords drawn uselessly, unable to move against this terrifying vision. You fools, Ariel continued, I and my fellows are ministers of fate. You three from Milan did supplant good Prospero, exposed unto the sea, which hath required it of you both, him and his innocent child, for which foul deed the powers have incensed the seas and shores against your peace. The harpy's words struck deeper than any sword could have. For the first time in 12 years, someone was forcing them to remember exactly what they had done. You shall have no further pain, Ariel finished, more gently now than a clear life ensuing, and your only safety lies in heart's sorrow and a clear life ensuing. And then the vision vanished, leaving the king and the two guilty men alone with their thoughts, which, for the very first time, they could no longer outrun. Oh, it is monstrous, monstrous, Alonso cried out, falling to his knees. Methought the billows spoke and told me of it. The winds did sing it to me. I'll seek him deeper than a plummet sounded, and with him there lie mudded. Stricken with guilt at last, he rushed off toward the sea, believing his son lost, believing this was his punishment. Watching from a hidden vantage point, Prospero felt something shift in his chest. The men who had wronged him were finally, truly sorry. And a man whose enemies have finally repented must decide what kind of man he wants to be, now that revenge is fully, completely in his grasp. Act 4, Scene 1, A Wedding Blessing and a Warning. Satisfied that Ferdinand had proven his love through honest labor, Prospero finally gave the young couple his blessing. Take my daughter, he told Ferdinand. But if thou dost break her virgin knot before all sanctimonious ceremonies may with full and holy rite be ministered, no sweet aspersion shall the heavens let fall to make this contract grow. As I hope for quiet days, fair issue, and long life, Ferdinand promised solemnly, I will not break this promise. Delighted, Prospero called upon his spirits to celebrate the engagement with a magical performance, a beautiful masque, full of goddesses and dancing nymphs, blessing the couple's future marriage with abundance and joy. Miranda and Ferdinand watched, enchanted, as spirits dressed as Iris, Ceres, and Juno blessed their union with songs of harvest and plenty. This is a most majestic vision, Ferdinand said, amazed. May I be bold to think these spirits, which by my art I have from their confines called to enact my present fancies, Prospero confirmed proudly. But suddenly, in the middle of the celebration, Prospero seemed to remember something. He had nearly forgotten about Caliban's plot against him. With a sharp gesture, he dismissed the spirits mid-dance and turned to the young couple, his mood shifting. I had forgot that foul conspiracy of the beast Caliban and his confederates against my life. The minute of their plot is almost come, and then, seeing the worried looks on the young lovers' faces, Prospero, sensing perhaps that his own mortality, his own end, was something worth speaking of, offered them and us one of the most beautiful speeches ever written about the nature of life itself. Our revels now are ended. These our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And, like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, all which it inherit, shall dissolve, and, like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. It is a strange thing to hear, a man comparing his entire life, his island, his magic, his very existence, to something as fragile and as fleeting as a dream that fades when you wake. But there is comfort in it too, if you listen closely. Because if our lives are dreams, gentle ones, brief ones, then perhaps it is not so frightening, after all, when it comes time to wake up. Act 5, Scene 1, Forgiveness. Caliban's plot, when it finally arrived, came to nothing at all. Ariel had led the 3 drunken conspirators through brambles and mud and finally into a filthy pond, before chasing them off with spirits disguised as hunting dogs. By the time Prospero's servants caught up with them, the great rebellion had dissolved into nothing more than 3 soggy, exhausted men, fast asleep in the mud. And now, with every thread of his long plan finally drawn together, Prospero stood alone with Ariel and asked the question that the whole story had been waiting for. "How's the day?" Prospero asked. Ariel answered, "At which time, my lord, you said our work should cease?" Prospero nodded slowly. The time had come. "Say, my spirit, how fares the king and his followers?" "Confined together," said Ariel, "just as you left them." "The king, his brother, and your brother, all 3 distracted, and the remainder mourning over them. Him that you termed, sir, the good old Lord Gonzalo, his tears run down his beard like winter's drops from eaves of reeds. Your charm so strongly works them that if you now beheld them, your affections would become tender." And then Ariel, a spirit, who had no heart of his own to break, who felt nothing the way humans feel things, said something that changed everything. "Mine would, sir, were I human." Prospero went very still. "And mine shall," he said quietly. "Hast thou, which art but air, a touch, a feeling of their afflictions, and shall not myself, one of their kind, that relish all as sharply, passion as they, be kindlier moved than thou art?" This was the turning point. Not magic, not a clever trick, just a simple, quiet realization. If even an airy spirit could feel pity for these broken, sorrowful men, how could Prospero, who was human, who knew exactly what suffering felt like, refuse to feel the same? "Though with their high wrongs I am struck to the quick, yet with my nobler reason gainst my fury do I take part," Prospero said slowly, as though discovering the thought even as he spoke it. "The rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance. They being penitent, the sole drift of my purpose doth extend not a frown further." He looked out at the island that had been his whole world for 12 long years. "Go release them, Ariel. My charms I'll break, their senses I'll restore, and they shall be themselves. And then, alone for just a moment, before his enemies were brought before him, Prospero turned to the elements of his island, the wind, the waves, the very magic that had ruled his life for over a decade, and said goodbye to all of it. Ye elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes and groves, I have bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous winds, and twixt the green sea and the azured vaults set roaring war. But this rough magic I here abjure. And when I have required some heavenly music, which even now I do, to work mine end upon their senses that this airy charm is for, I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book. And he meant it. After everything, after 12 years of magic and mastery and control, Prospero chose, of his own free will, to put it all down. One by one, Ariel brought the bewildered king and his men before Prospero, who had dressed once more in his old robes as the rightful Duke of Milan. King Alonso, seeing him, could hardly believe his eyes. Were thou beast he or no, or some enchanted trifle to abuse me, as late I have been, I not know, Alonso said, dazed. But, as 'tis probable, this is a most majestic vision, and harmonious charmingly. Thy dukedom I resign, and do entreat thou pardon me my wrongs. Prospero stepped forward and embraced him. Welcome, my friends all, Prospero said warmly. And then, turning to his brother, the man who had betrayed him 12 years before, and never once apologized, Prospero said something remarkable. For you, most wicked sir, whom to call brother would even infect my mouth, I do forgive thy rankest fault, all of them. Not because Antonio deserved it, not because Antonio had even asked for it, but because Prospero, finally, had decided that carrying 12 years of anger was a heavier burden than simply setting it down. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Prospero drew back a curtain, and there, alive, well, and laughing, sat Ferdinand and Miranda, playing a game of chess together. My boy, Alonso cried, rushing forward, tears streaming down his face. Is this a vision of the island? Ferdinand rose and embraced his father, scarcely able to speak through his own tears. And Miranda, who had grown up seeing only her father and one strange island, looked out now at all these new people, these visitors from a world she'd never known, and spoke the line that has echoed through 400 years of theatre since. Oh, wonder, how many goodly creatures are there here? How beauteous mankind is. O brave new world that has such people in't. Prospero, watching his daughters wander with quiet amusement, murmured softly, "'Tis new to thee." The ship, it turned out, had not been wrecked at all, only scattered, then safely hidden by Ariel, fully seaworthy, and waiting in the harbour. The sailors, who had been charmed into a magical sleep, woke fresh and well, utterly bewildered by everything that had happened. Caliban, Stefano, and Trinculo were brought before the group too, muddy, ashamed, and finally sobered up. Caliban, looking at Stefano now without any wine-soaked illusions, seemed almost embarrassed by his own foolishness. What a thrice double ass was I, to take this drunkard for a god, Caliban admitted quietly, and worship this dull fool. Prospero, in a final act of generosity, didn't punish him. He simply sent him off to tidy the cell, with the gentle expectation that, in exchange for good behavior, he might earn his own kind of pardon too. And here is where Shakespeare does something no other play of his quite does. The story is over. The lovers are united. The enemies are forgiven. The ship will sail home in the morning. And yet, instead of ending the play there, Shakespeare brings Prospero out, alone one final time, to speak directly to the audience. Not as a duke, not as a magician, just as a man, standing in front of strangers, asking for something very simple. Now my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have's mine own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true, I must be here confined by you, or sent to Naples. Let me not, since I have my dukedom got, and pardoned the deceiver, dwell in this bare island by your spell, but release me from my bands with the help your good hands. He has no magic left now, no staff, no book. Only his own strength, he admits, is most faint, tired, worn thin by 12 years on an island, and by everything it took to finally forgive the people who put him there. And so he asks the audience, asks us to set him free. Not with magic this time, just with kindness, just with applause, just with the simple, generous act of letting him go home. As you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free. For centuries, audiences have heard something more than a magician's request in those lines. They've heard a playwright, quietly, saying goodbye. Let's sit with that idea for a little while, and let's be honest about what we actually know and what we only suspect. Here is the truth, as best as historians can piece it together. For a very long time, for most of the last 300 years, really, people believed that The Tempest was the last play Shakespeare ever wrote, the very last word he gave to the stage. And that belief made Prospero's farewell feel almost unbearably personal, as if Shakespeare himself stood there in that final scene, breaking his own pen instead of a wizard's staff. But more recent research has complicated that lovely, simple story. We now know that after The Tempest, Shakespeare didn't go silent. He went on to collaborate with a younger playwright named John Fletcher on at least 2 more plays, Henry VIII, and a play called The Two Noble Kinsmen. There may have been a third, a now lost play called Cardenio, that we know existed only because records of its performance survive, even though the play itself has vanished from history. So, strictly speaking, The Tempest was not Shakespeare's final play, but here's the more interesting truth hiding just beneath that correction. Scholars largely agree that The Tempest was the last play Shakespeare wrote entirely by himself. Every line his, every word his. After this, he shared the pen. He brought in help. He began, in other words, to step back. And that distinction matters more than it might seem to, because somewhere between 1611 and 1613, Shakespeare did go home, home to Stratford-upon-Avon, the quiet town where he'd been born, far from the noise and danger and brilliance of London's theatres. He spent his final years there, looking after his property, his family, his quiet life, until his death in 1616. So even if The Tempest wasn't technically his last word for the stage, it was, in every way that matters emotionally, his last great solo statement, his last time standing entirely alone at the writing desk, giving everything he had to one final, complete vision. And what a vision to end on, an old, powerful man on an island, learning, finally, after everything, to let go. Whether or not Shakespeare consciously intended Prospero as a self-portrait, the play certainly invites the comparison and has for centuries. Think about what Prospero actually does in that final act. He has every reason for revenge. His own brother stole his title and nearly had him killed. He has spent 12 years alone on an island because of one man's betrayal. And when fate finally, almost magically, delivers his enemies onto the very shore where he's been stranded, when he has every tool, every spirit, every storm at his command to make them suffer exactly as he suffered, he forgives them instead. The rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance. That line might be the truest center of the whole play. Not magic, not romance, not even the storm that gives the play its name. Just this, that the harder, rarer, more remarkable thing a person can do is forgive, when revenge was fully within their grasp. It's worth remembering, too, that Shakespeare's life as a playwright was not an easy one, even at its most successful. He worked for popular audiences, ordinary Londoners who paid a penny to stand in the open yard of the Globe Theatre, alongside wealthier patrons who sat in covered galleries. He wrote quickly, constantly, under real commercial pressure, often basing his plots on old stories, old histories, older plays, borrowing freely, the way most playwrights of his era did, because the very idea of copyright, as we understand it today, simply didn't exist yet. This made him, in his own time, a popular entertainer above all else, someone who had to please a paying crowd night after night, for decades. And pleasing a crowd, for decades, surely meant absorbing criticism, jealousy, rivalry, and the occasional cruelty of people who believed themselves more important, more refined, more deserving of acclaim. If Prospero's epilogue really is Shakespeare speaking in his own voice, even partly, even just in spirit, then perhaps what we're hearing is not just an old magician's farewell, but a tired, accomplished man's quiet decision to forgive all of it, the critics, the rivals, the hard years, the grudges he had every right to keep, and then to simply go home. There is, of course, another way entirely to read this play, one that scholars in the last 100 years or so have taken very seriously. Look again at the relationship between Prospero and Caliban. Prospero arrives on an island that already has an inhabitant. He uses his superior knowledge, his books, his magic, what we might today call his technology, to subdue that inhabitant, claim the island as his own, and put its original owner to work as a servant. Read this way, the Tempest becomes something else, an early, uneasy reflection on colonization, on what happens when one people, armed with superior tools and the conviction of their own right to rule, arrive somewhere that already belongs to someone else. This is also a completely valid way to read the play, and it has produced some of the most important Tempest scholarship of the last century. But I don't think that reading needs to cancel out the other one. A play this rich can hold both truths at once. It can be an honest, uncomfortable reflection on power and possession, and it can also be, at its very end, a sincere meditation on forgiveness. Shakespeare, after all, gives Caliban some of the most beautiful, aching language in the entire play. Language far too tender and far too human for a writer who simply wanted to dismiss him. "This island's mine, by Sycorax my mother, which thou taxed from me." Caliban's grief, in other words, is taken seriously. The play does not pretend his anger is unreasonable. And maybe that's exactly why forgiveness, in this story, means something. It would be easy to forgive a man who'd done you no real harm. It's much harder and much more interesting to watch someone forgive a brother who tried to have him killed. To watch a wronged man set free the very people who wronged him, simply because carrying that anger year after year had become heavier than letting it go. If there's one thing worth carrying with you into sleep tonight, I think it's this. The right time to forgive someone is almost never when it feels easy, or when you've stopped caring, or when enough time has finally numbed the hurt. The right time is usually right now, today, while the wound is still real, while forgiving still costs you something. That's what makes it rare. That's what makes it, as Prospero says, the better part of virtue. One last small story before we close our eyes. This play, this quiet story about an old magician and a storm and an island, has traveled much further than Shakespeare could ever have imagined. In the 1950s, a science fiction film called Forbidden Planet borrowed its basic shape directly from the Tempest, a brilliant, isolated scientist, his innocent daughter, a strange servant, a remote world cut off from civilization. That film, in turn, became one of the direct inspirations for a much bigger story you've almost certainly heard of, a little franchise called Star Wars. Echoes of the Tempest live inside some of the most beloved science fiction of the last century. A wise, isolated figure with strange powers, a young hero discovering a wider universe, a sense of distant, magical forces shaping ordinary lives. Even the title of Aldous Huxley's novel Brave New World comes directly from this play, from Miranda's wide-eyed wonder at meeting people from beyond her tiny island, unaware that some of those very people were the ones who once cast her and her father out to sea. It's a quietly ironic phrase when you trace it back to its source, and Huxley clearly knew exactly what he was doing when he borrowed it. So here is where we leave Prospero and perhaps, in some small way, Shakespeare himself. Standing alone on an empty stage, no island around him anymore, no spirits left to command, just an old man asking quietly, humbly, to be allowed to go home, not because the magic stopped working, not because the stories stopped being good, but because every story, even the very best ones, eventually needs an ending so that the person telling it can finally rest. I think that's a rather lovely thing to fall asleep thinking about, don't you? That even the most powerful among us, the magicians, the wronged dukes, the storytellers who could once summon storms with a wave of their hand, eventually look at everything they've built, and everyone they've forgiven, and everything they've finally set free, and simply say, "That's enough now. I can rest. You can too. The storm has passed. The ship is safe in the harbor. Everyone who needed forgiving has been forgiven. There's nothing left to do tonight, but close your eyes. Good night."